Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Royal Drawing School's Creative Conversation series. Tonight, our conversation focuses on the work of the artist R.B. Kitaj. To explore Kitaj's life and work, I'm delighted to welcome Tracy Bartley and Michael Ajerman, each with close creative links to the painter. So to briefly introduce our speakers, Tracy Bartley was Kitaj's assistant for over a decade in his final years in Los Angeles, and she's now director of the Kitaj Estate and the Kitaj Studio Project. She studied painting and art conservation, receiving a Master of Arts Conservation degree from Queen's University in 1995. And alongside her work with artists and collectors on collection management and legacy planning, Tracy has worked in Los Angeles as a project coordinator at the Getty Conservation Institute, as well as an exhibition consultant for the Museum of Contemporary Art. Michael Ajerman is a painter who's been affected by Kitaj's work and writing since he was a student, studying at the Corcoran School of Art, the New York Studio School, and the Yale Summer School at Norfolk. He completed his master's at Slade in 2003 and received the British Institute Award from the Royal Academy. In 2018, he was awarded UCLA's Kitaj Research Fellowship, which involves scholarly and archival investigations on Kitaj and on Walter Sickert. Michael has exhibited his work internationally, and this spring he'll have a solo exhibition at Hemingway Art in Oxford. So warm welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us and taking part in this series, and a welcome to our audience. And please do, as always, feel free to leave your questions and suggestions, comments in the Q&A and chat box, and Tracy and Michael will address those questions at the end of their discussion. Well, welcome. Oh, you're both on mute.
I was
there we
muted.
go.
Sorry about that. It was
wonderful.
Be a silent film. Okay. Should I do the share screen and get started?
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I know we've got some fantastic images to share.
We got 101.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Hang on. Okay, cool. Okay.
Great. Well, I'll leave it to you to take to the floor, and I will reappear later. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning, Mike.
Thank you. So I think I'll do the first loop. Please add whatever you want, whenever you want, and we'll just go for it. For everyone out there, I'm sure there'll be a percentage of people that know about R.B. Kitaj's work, some of it, a little bit of it, but for this lecture, I'm going to at least begin with, if you opened up an Art Now book or Art Then book, you would probably see this painting on the far right, which is called The Murder of Rosa Luxemburg, which Kitaj did in 1960 whilst he was a student at the Royal College of Art. I've already jumped ahead a little bit. Kitaj was born in Ohio, spent some time on the GI Bill, and was a student at the Vienna Academy before going to the Ruskin School of Art. And then after that, wound up at the Royal College of Art. I got that right, Tracy?
You got that right. Yes.
All right, cool.
Yes.
Rosa Luxemburg, The Murder of Rosa Luxemburg is a really, it's a pretty incredible seminal piece to be made by I guess an art student, or even a slightly mature art student, as he was older than most of his peer group. It's kind of combining a really kind of, in my mind, a kind of strong sense of kind of a new kind of flatness of kind of 60s painting. It's definitely trying to be figurative, but very aware of sort of, I guess you would call New York abstract expressionism school, sort of a really kind of visceral use of black, and the kind of zit marks, which you could kind of say are more aggressive than a Barnett Newman, are supposed to be the kind of bullets kind of ricocheting into Rosa Luxemburg's body. Rosa Luxemburg was a political figure for the Communist Party for Germany post-World War I, a Jewish woman who was murdered, I believe, by the German army. That's her physique, kind of sprawled across the middle of the composition, whilst the kind of odd figure on the far left is supposed to be Kitaj's grandmother. On the far right is words about the painting, and that those words have been really just kind of shoved into the painting. I thought it'd be a good idea also to include a kind of observation-based drawing that would have been done before the Royal College of Art. That's a student drawing from the Ruskin School of Art from the mid-50s.
And I think this is a great painting to start with, in my mind, because it combines so many things that Kitaj was interested in. I think the use of text, which became quite controversial as his career developed, drawing, a strong sense of drawing with paint. He taught out this concept of painting drawing, where the line was blurred between the two activities. And then this collage kind of composition that he frequently returned to.
Definitely.
It's a good one. At the Tate.
And it's usually at the Tate, up at the Tate in London. But for this conversation, I'm trying to pick work that may not be known to most people, or I guess if it was a music group or on albums, it would be the kind of B-sides, so to speak. When I was a student at the New York Studio School, we were drawing 4 hours a day from the model and painting 4 hours a day from the model, divided in half by lunch and things. My teachers were really wonderful, but it was a question of what was being shown as examples of other artists to look at. A lot of it was sort of early 20th century work, or I guess we'd say Impressionism, and kind of after, in certain ways, after Giacometti, it was kind of like a no-go. I discovered these works by chance in the library. The library at the time was alphabetical, and I basically found this book on the shelf, and maybe it was because it was close to the H for Hockney's drawings. I don't even know anymore, but I wasn't too sure if I could understand something like this in my 20s as being educated in New Jersey and things. But this was something that I could kind of felt really new to me and felt really exciting in regards to what could be done with the figure in a really kind of direct observation-based approach. It always felt to me that you knew exactly where Kitaj was in regards to how close or how far away he was from the sitter. The use of color definitely felt quite connected to Degas. More recently, more and more, that kind of beautiful line, I think, really has some type of homage, or not homage, but connection, I'd almost say, to something like late Egon Schiele. But to be clear, if people know or don't know, that's it's titled Marianne on the far left. On the far right is the writer, TV personality, Quentin Crisp, who used to model at the Royal College of Art at the same time when Hockney and Kitaj was there. If anyone's interested in him, just type in Quentin Crisp and David Letterman, and you'll be amused for hours.
And these are both well after Kitaj had left the Royal College. I think they're 79 and 80.
Yeah, 79 and 80, yes.
When Kitaj really started working with pastel after his wife, Sandra Fisher, got him to go and look more. Here we are. Look more at Degas and other impressionists that were using pastels. And Kitaj was very inspired, and it really worked into his the value that he saw in drawing, how important your 3-hour drawing sessions, Michael, were just what Kitaj thought was the necessary track for art students to be taking. It was so important to have that skill developed. However you used it down the road, but to have that as your foundation was so important.
Yeah. And just to be clear for all the viewing public, that is a Sandra Fisher on the far left.
On the left.
A lot of those, they're not easy to find, unfortunately. And I paired that with a drawing by Vigor Erika of his wife Anna. They were Erika and Anna were very close with Kitaj and Sandra during the time when they lived in Paris and traveled together at times. And also to be clear, to add to what Tracy said, the whole concept of the 3-hour drawing session in a school environment, I personally feel is very different when it's a personal environment outside of art school. So, I think it's for the students out there, school is important, but don't downplay what should be done or could be done after school, so to speak.
Right. No, and Kitaj and Sandra had separate studios in London, and both of them engaged models very regularly. When Kitaj came to Los Angeles, people were always asking him, did he want models brought in to the studio? He had a wonderful studio in the back of his house here in LA. And he didn't. He had decided that period had ended with London.
I think, just as a side note from the time at UCLA, I think there was a letter from Jonathan Safran Foer who wanted to pose. And
yes.
I just said, just send me a really bad photo of you. That's what it was. It was just like send me like those blurry
yes. He worked from photographs
for me to kind of work from.
Right. He draw his grandchildren. He
Yeah.
was so close family. He was always drawing and sketching, and he would draw the grandkids regularly.
Here are two more that I wanted to show. That's a poster for, as you can probably read, it's for the Munich Olympics in '72 commissioned a whole wide range of international artists to make posters. And then this one is Kitaj's example of a swimmer. And I think it's really an incredible piece. The way that the water is kind of divided into sections, the handling of the body feels that it probably had been a painting and later photographed for lithography in that kind of way that Kitaj was painting in the '70s with this almost kind of dry application of
if I remember correctly, it was printed at Telpra, and it was 2 paintings. So we still have in the estate the little ocean canvas, and then the figure was a separate. And Chris Prater was a master at being able to take Kitaj's images and photograph them and collage them together to get the effect that Kitaj was looking for.
Yeah.
And then the beautiful Philip Roth drawing.
And I think it's also that's wonderful. Well, just about the swimmer again, just for people that have done athletics, or and Kitaj definitely had a huge admiration for athletics and baseball players and things. It's really that kind of sensation of almost like the body doing one thing and the mind doing another. That's kind of interesting dislocation. And the one of Philip Roth, they were very close to each other during their time in the '80s when they both lived in central London. I think it's, for everyone who's kind of curious about it, I think it's about 12 sittings, 16 sittings, which I think is it's kind of nice that it looks like neither of them are in a rush, which I like. And I think that the lack of rushing really shows, I think, in the picture.
I agree. They were very close friends, and a friendship that continued through the end of Kitaj's life. Lots to talk about.
Yeah, lots to talk about. These are mine. I wanted to include, so this was when I found the books at the studio school. These were some things that I was trying to do to try to, explore with pastel of using the figure, or explore with using color in a way. Back to what Tracy was saying. So, yeah, I think it was about 3 hours and counting for each. Some of the odd damage to them is because of Hurricane Sandy, so not my fault. But yeah, this was me just taking some of that and trying to possibly do my own thing a little bit. This is much more recent, where these are both watercolors and they're both done from direct observation. Quite fond of both of these. I think they both really kind of work in very different ways. These are both friends of mine. There's a friend of mine at the bottom who was quite bravely posed for me, very, very pregnant, and basically gave birth the next day. And when using watercolor, I think there's always a sense of emergency, and I think there's always the sense of emergency when working with a sitter. You know, I think nowadays people find the whole process very, very difficult and very, very strange, and maybe because it's quite hard to kind of relax and shut off and tune out and things. But I think possibly some of the things that I saw in those books, and later when I saw the works in person, at least from the pastels, from really trying to figure out where the individual is, and figure out where my viewpoint is in regards to trying to get some type of semblance and some type of interaction of that or with that. We'll move along. This is a photo I took. This was kind of a bit of a game changer for me as a student. Kitaj had come to the New York Studio School in the late 90s. And I quite funnily, I just discovered him about like 2 or 3 months before, like that book, so to speak, that large monograph and things. I think the Marco Livingston one. And it's a very strange lecture that he, I believe, that he gave. It was this lecture called The Cutting Edge, which related to some of his ideas after he had written this book on the far right, which is called The First Diasporist Manifesto, which I just finished at the time, and I thought I understood what he was about and things. And this came across as an individual who's very interested in, I would say, in his conclusion as an artist. You know, Kitaj had always was very concerned with the idea of I guess you would say the cutting edge, so to speak, or his idea of an old person style. I think he called it the geriatric avant-garde, so to speak, of some of the great painters.
I think he really, you know, he talked a lot about how he knew what people loved of his work. He understood that those pastels, that there was a period of time that when he was creating art that was very commercially successful.
Yeah.
But he couldn't stay there. He needed to experiment. It was a drive that he had to the end. He was very prolific. And keeping going and trying new things, and this idea of kind of making it new. I think too, it's interesting that you shared this slide. Just to rewind on my process with Kitaj, and I came to him in the 90s when he gave this talk. I would have still been working full-time at the Getty Conservation Institute, but he was a speaker who I invited to speak about legacy and contemporary art. And when I first met Kitaj, he said, "Oh, I don't care what happens. I don't care what happens to my art at all." And I spent an hour with him in his house. And by the end of the conversation, his youngest son, Max, who was living with him, would have been about 11 or 12, I think, at the time. And he had come around to the idea that, yes, okay, this is important. What happens to my work and how it's remembered is important. And from that initial meeting, we grew quite close, and I went, and within a year, I was working for him full time. So that fabulous yellow paper is how Kitaj wrote everything in red pen on yellow paper, and then would bring to me to transcribe, and then he would edit on the printed out page. So this is very much part of his process, which all of this exists within the archive at UCLA. If anyone is here or coming here to Los Angeles, it's a wonderful collection that is accessible to anyone who's interested. So I encourage people to check it out.
And I personally would encourage others to do that too. I had first time I went to the archive was on my own initiative. There's a book that's published called the Confessions of an Old Jewish Painter. I guess that's what it was published as. I had heard about this book before, this transcript before it had been published, and there are 3 drafts of it, which in my opinion are no disrespect to the publisher, but I think that some things had been kind of left out of some of the drafts that were I think should have been in the final version. And what is it, 200 boxes of things? 200?
Yes. And then we probably have another 100 that are on their way of kind of things kept close in the work we're doing towards a catalog resume.
And there's I mean, there's letters from Susan Sontag, there's letters from Dory Ashton, there's correspondences with Lee Friedlander, there's correspondences with a great deal of his friends and peers. It's kind of like you're eavesdropping or wiretapping one side of a conversation, which is a little bit strange, but and also personal family letters, and which it can be a little bit awkward at times to read if you're doing scholarly research. But I did also want to say and show that there are also slightly tongue-in-cheek fun things. This is a tiny, I don't know if you call it, not a manuscript, Jesus.
It's
a little needlepoint. I'm sorry, needlepoint. Yeah, it's a needlepoint that Kitaj's mother did of his painting of Francis Bacon from the mid '60s. So there's some lovely, very kind of sweet, tender things in the collection too. Besides, documents that are sort of dealing with the Shoah and Jewishness and art critics and intense times.
lots of lists. Kitaj loved lists.
Yes, lots of lists. Yes, lots of lists. I guess we can move along. I wanted to include this. This is I think this might be one of those kind of B-sides. It's not really kind of shown or discussed. This is called The Communist and the Socialist. I don't even know if things like this are interesting anymore to people, but I think it's a beautiful drawing. I think it's a sensual drawing. From what I've read about it, each figure had been drawn from life separately, and then he kind of put the whole thing together. But I think the title kind of makes it a bit more interesting. It also gives it a little bit more wit, if you want to say opposites attract, so on and so forth. I think
the theme that Kitaj, there's a painting, Communists and Socialists. Kitaj had a habit of revisiting these ideas in different media with different casts of characters. He was very interested in theater and this idea of a troupe, and these characters show up again and again in different drawings and paintings, and so this very much falls into that purview, and shows his expertise with pastel.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
And to continue with that, I know that he was quite fond of let's say it wrong, Ratapoline by Daumier, the kind of fictitious character that Daumier had created for his lithographs, and later kind of made the sculpture of, and kind of sent this sort of this kind of twisted fellow on these kind of political journeys and things.
No, it's even the character of Kitaj himself, taking it back to the Roth drawing. Sabbath's Theater is based off of Kitaj and conversations between Roth and Kitaj. And that was the first gift Kitaj gave me when I went to work for him, was a copy of, he's like, if you can read this, if you're okay, on we go. And I was okay.
Yeah, I remember specific bits of that book, but I don't know if we should do that in front of 120 people. So
He was a very complicated human, very, very funny.
Yeah.
If there's one part of his personality that I want to continue sharing with people is that he was funny and kind. He was one of the kindest people
I think
that I've ever worked with.
I think that's also great to mention, just because I remember when he came to the studio school, there was a Q&A. I mean, the lecture itself was about 30 minutes. He talked for about 45 minutes with Q&A. It was a 45-minute Q&A, and it became almost like a town hall banter thing. And there were moments that were absolutely hilarious. There were moments that were definitely tense, but afterwards there was this dinner, and this guy had said to me, "I can't believe you asked him a question. He's so scary. He's so," and I found it, to be just the opposite, really. So, yeah.
I think coming off the Tate War and everything that had happened in London, that was so public, that there was this perception of him as very angry, but he wasn't, and he adored students. He regularly had students to the studio. He corresponded with students. One of the most touching incidents was right after he died. We received in the mail a painting that a student had sent him as a thank you. And it broke my heart to have to reach out to them to tell them that it hadn't arrived in time, because he really was very generous with his time. He really believed that was his, a role for him to have, was to pass on his knowledge to future generations. Part of the legacy.
What did I put in next? These are just, I don't know if these are echoes or responses to this is my stuff again. These were just two paintings that just like the kind of the whole idea of the kind of two sort of slightly polar opposites of people and interiors. This is called Tight Hamstrings on the far left, and that's complementary on the far right. And for my own work, as I said before in the beginning, taking certain ideas from the drawings that were done from life, and the capabilities and the thought processes and the wants that someone would want to kind of generate of a kind of constructed composition, which is not from life and not from photography and from something else, was something and is still something that's very, very important to my work. This is my cat and her husband. This is a drawing. It's a large charcoal and pastel. I think it's mischievous. I think it's hilarious. I think it's slightly perverse. I think it's wonderful. All those things I sign up for, and I say, give me 2 scoops of. I would say that and I think the people that know me, I've been doing a lot of pictures of animals and cats over the past 2 years during the pandemic. And something that I've been thinking about is when animals are being painted as being an architectural device or a symbolist device, or in fact, if it's a actual portrait of an animal. All those types of different, miscellaneous variations of what an animal can be or has been in the history of painting and depictions is not something that keeps me up at night, but maybe something that I kind of spin about every once in a while. And
I think I'm in the process of scanning a lot of photographs that we hold that haven't gone to the archive yet. And there's actually a folder of cats, just
really?
photographs, Kitaj cats. And he had a cat, Kitty Kitaj, who was a staple. If anyone ever came to the house here in LA, Kitty would make sure that he was met. So yeah, there aren't a lot of animals. I'm trying to think if there's other work. There's a horse in an early painting.
And there's that Just there's that
Oh,
weird.
and the dog, the black
Yeah,
dog, and the lizard. So there
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
yeah, those weird kind of, that weird gecko, is it called?
Yes.
Yeah, the
With the
screen
lost
painting. Yeah,
tail. And-
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And then the black dog is a symbol of depression.
yeah. I this is the wedding paint. This is the wedding. This is a depiction of Kitaj's marriage to the painter Sandra Fisher, and his the men that held up his chuppah, for all you. Oh wow! For all you non-Jews out there, in the Jewish religion, when you're married, you're kind of married under a cloth, and each man hold a guest of the bride and groom hold the side, so to speak, and his could have seen as a group of best men, and I believe so. That for him, that was Freud, Frank Auerbach, David Hockney, and his son Lem. Is that what?
Yeah. Lem is in the foreground,
Yeah,
and
Lem is in the
Dominique in the
foreground. Yeah,
white traditional, she's East Indian.
Yeah.
And then Max, the back of Max's head
yeah.
at the bottom center. Yeah.
Supposedly this.
Who wasn't at the wedding.
Yeah,
But-
as a painting for myself, I'm interested in why I like this painting is just there's a variation between a painting being finished and a painting stopping. And I not, you probably would know better than me, but from what I had read and things, that it was quote unquote unfinished or not completed, or he just felt like that was enough and I'm stopping. And I think whatever category it is, I think it's the complexities of trying to chase a moment, paint a moment, where the longer you work on it or longer you chase something, that the further it feels away, and you just realize that you're kind of just tracing almost like snail trails of an event that's really important to yourself.
Yeah. No, and the idea of finish was something he was exploring a lot in the last decade of his life. And I think the Los Angeles paintings, which I think you have one at the end, are very telling of that kind of level. What is finished? He was looking a lot at Cézanne's bathers, like how much, how far. He also had the habit, which was sometimes a little frustrating, of going back into work many years later. So I think this painting was started in 93 and finished in 98. And so he would revisit things, add things, take things out, rarely completely paint over to a painting and change the whole thing, but often would change them as time went on and retitle them, which was another, just as somebody who's trying to catalog, could be a challenge.
And I think it's important to point out that there's really no finished sketches for he wasn't one to kind of work from a scaled up sketch and things. And from what Tracy, you sent me this, and it's great to see. It looks like it's either done on a paper table
Napkin.
or a napkin, and
it's on a little,
yeah,
which was his process. So he would go, when he was in London, there was a coffee shop he'd go to every morning. And then when he was in Los Angeles, there was one within walking distance of his home. And he would draw out different compositions, often based off source material. He had a lot of source material, books and pages torn out of magazines and film stills and all these, this troupe that he worked off over and over again. And brought back into the paintings. So this would be a napkin from the coffee shop in London with his pen. And yeah, it didn't work off. This would be the most developed. And then going in onto the the prepared canvas with charcoal and drawing out in that way, but then adjusting it as he went along as part of the process.
I think this is a tough painting to talk about, and I'm beginning to wonder why I even put it in here. So we're having a bit of fun, but I don't know how many people saw the retrospective. I don't even know how long ago it was in Berlin, and the curator out there did, I thought, an incredible job. It was waiting to see all this work for years and years, and so much of it was there. Let me get the title right. This is The Killer Critic Assassinated by His Widower, Even. I think this would probably be one of the last finished paintings in London. This would be after the occurrences of the Tate exhibition. I don't want to say about it anymore. I remember seeing it for the first time in person, and it felt like a different person had painted it compared to everything else everything else that had been in the exhibition.
Did you see it in Berlin?
Yeah, I went to Berlin.
Yeah.
In the snow. It was great.
It was first shown at the Royal Academy.
Yes.
Right before Kitaj left, as a part of a really large installation with multiple panels. And this was kind of the centerpiece of this very large homage to Sandra, who had just died.
As a painting, I think it's interesting because it's, the longer I spend time with it, it's trying to do everything that you're not supposed to do, or at least what they tell you not to do, or your friends tell you not to do. Where I think there are specific times in art history where there are paintings that are definitely a catharsis for the individual who's made them. And it's a question if they sink or swim. I would say this swims, but I think certain things like gluing book covers on or tacking them in literally into the page. I made this kind of graph of trying to explain a few of it. The whole concept of sort of taking Manet's, I think that's Woman in Pink and White, at the far right, placing her at the top right hand of the composition, kind of like watching the scene of, and it's supposed to be Manet and Kitaj basically shooting at art critics with kind of odd pistols and things. You can probably, for everyone who's ever been to Hebrew school or yeshiva dropout like me, the Hebraic sign on the figure on the far left, that's a kaf, which probably means K for Kitaj, so that's supposed to be, I'm assuming, to be him. Once again, he's given Manet wings. He's given Manet a Torah, it's called a yad, I believe, at the bottom left, which is for pointing into Torahs. There's erections or penises pissing on the critic. Well, at the same time, there's, as you can see in the words, hopefully you can read, it says prostate drip. It's, it's definitely not PG, I guess, if, so to speak. But
interesting thinking, from the first painting, right? The Murder of Rosa Luxemburg.
Yeah.
It's not that different.
Actually, in a
right?
way, yeah, in a weird way,
I think so much happened.
I never thought of that, where it just really, putting like literally gluing the words down and putting like literally writing your messages in with like R is the escape, two personality. I think in the mouth it says yellow press, mean men painted in blood. I mean, it's and it's interesting to move along. Here's the explanation. To go, well, I mean, we can jump back, but to what the work would become when you were working for him in the time in Los Angeles, and things, which is I'm not sure if peaceful is the right. Well, I think anything is peaceful after that painting, literally. and to go back image-wise, you'd mentioned that this was the drawing room in the house.
Drawing studio, which, when Kitaj died, we were preparing for a show at Marlborough, New York. So there was a lot of packing going on. There were things all over the place. But this was the front room of his house in Los Angeles. He called it the Yellow Studio. It was Bango Yellow in the backyard. And that's where he did all of the painting. But then he had this room at the front. And I worked at a big table in the middle. And this was the drawing studio. So he would tack, they were all like a painted cork on the wall where he could tack into and do many, many drawings simultaneously. So he'd have his charcoal and his pastel and go daily, and had a very regimented day where there was, time in the morning to read, time in the morning to write, time in the morning to draw, lunch, siesta, and painting. And that was the day. And then baseball or a movie in bed. So it was a very structured existence, which I'm told he carried. That was his London schedule as well. So yeah, this is the drawing studio.
Yeah. For the picture on the far right in the photograph is a drawing that Kitaj had done of painter's wife, Sandra Fisher. And it's there's been a lot of discussion about these kind of Los Angeles paintings that he kind of made about this belief that the image of Sandra was going to be this, I always say it wrong, this Saskina, which in Jewish text sort of means like a female depiction of God. I do think that it was a complicated declaration, but I do think in this one specifically that there's a lot more of a personality depth, I think, to how he's painted Sandra and possibly painted himself. There's no way that one can compete with something like this, and also I think there's about 20 years difference in regards to the individual and how he's working and making things.
And this is a painting of a painting. So there's a painting of Sandra that was started in London, Sandra in Armani suit, which is a full-size portrait.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, that he kept. This is a little different because he changed it to red in the background and added the wings. In the original painting, it was green. And it was stayed in the painting studio, and he would kiss it every day when he went in. And she really did become this motif that he couldn't leave alone, that he kept revisiting. I think it's a very complicated love story. But certainly this idea of meeting her again, he talked to her constantly in the studio, and she was very present, even though I never met her. Her presence was very much there. And I think there's over 20 of these, Los Angeles, which is the angels. So it all came together. And it's quite different than the paintings he was doing initially when he arrived in Los Angeles, which are, much more kind of robust to what he was doing in London. I don't want to say finished, but with that kind of quality, a lot more paint and the color. But you did see a real shift in his palette, I think, from London to LA. The light and the sun here is so different. And he came to LA, he felt a very strong connection to Los Angeles. His two older children were living in and nearby. His birth father was buried here. His mother had been here, and Hockney was here, who was still a very, very dear friend. So it made sense that he came here when he left London.
I thought we'd end here, at least the images wise. This is a student drawing that Tracy, you were really kind to kind of show. Looking at it, it just feels like everything is there that would arrive basically in no time. I know people that when we talk about Kitaj and things, a lot of people just talk about, the architecture and that would appear, I think in the more celebrated works of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's incredible that it's just there. It feels like it's basically just coming out of the ground, and it's gonna just bloom. You know?
And I love this because this would be a drawing studio when he was at the Ruskin School, with his classmates standing at their easels and in their, we call them donkeys. Do you call them donkeys in England?
The lower
the
one.
drawing board?
Yeah.
You know, from way back when I was in art school.
Yeah.
Which he still had in the studio in LA. He moved it with him. And this drawing to me speak time that was put into everything. He was not a quick, did not create things quickly at all. They took time and carefully revisiting and revisiting and revisiting, and that mark making, and then, like you said, Michael, the structure, how it all fits together, and it does. It's full of movement yet contained. So, and it's in the archive here at UCLA.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah. I'll do this.
That was fun. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi, thanks so much. A wonderful discussion, and really fascinating to hear your insights on Kitaj's work, but also interweaving with insights on his life and his approach to his practice. That was really, really fascinating. Thank you. And I was really struck by all the materials you were sharing from the archive, because that really gives us a sort of enlarged sense of his oeuvre and the B-side works, as Michael described them, which is rather wonderful. Yeah, I just wondered whether we've got time for about 10 minutes for questions. So, welcome to those in the audience who'd like to pose any questions. But I wondered if to both of you really, working in the archive, if there'd been particular moments of discovery for either of you that had kind of changed your sense of Kitaj's work, or were particularly illuminating, or works that perhaps emerged after his death.
Michael?
Tracy?
I don't mind. I can, when I worked for Kitaj, his friend circle was very small here in Los Angeles. He wasn't very social. He very much kept to himself. He kind of promoted this idea of the hermit, that you had to come to him and then you had to sit in an uncomfortable plastic chair and drink orange juice because that's the only thing he had in the fridge. And he kind of created this persona. He seemed much older than he was. And I think that everything that had happened in London had really taken its toll. But there's really wonderful letters from his friends, as Michael referenced. And there's a wonderful postcard from R.B, talking about the vegetarian restaurant that they were going to go to. And will you pick me up at this time? And I think that intimacy, which is something that I didn't get to see so much, and that understanding of where he sat within this amazing circle of artists that were working in London. I think that for me was really special. I knew this, this man who's put his family first. He spent a lot of time with his family here in LA, but didn't really have that broader piece going on. And I could find that in the archive. That's certainly there, along with amazing photographs of him with these same people, him and Hockney on trips together, hiking together, really wonderful, and showing that kind of how beloved he was by his friends. So that's a personal piece, not so much the work itself, but about.
Yeah, no, I love the personal is really wonderful to hear. And I was intrigued by hearing about the correspondence with Susan Sontag. I mean, I'd love to read that.
Yes. We have a dream of getting funding to digitize the archive. So if there's anyone out there in the audience who has any leads, please feel free to message me.
I mean, I think for me, not to kind of copycat, but I think it was really the letters. I spent a lot of time on those letters. I think for my research at the time, but also I began to be really interested in everything that I was reading. I really began to kind of get opinions of what his peer group thought of him, but also just the vibe from the people that were writing. Some people were incredibly funny that I never thought were funny. Some were incredibly self-centered. Some were a little bit too confessional. The Philip Roth ones, we will never be able, the Philip Roth ones were just mind-boggling. So as I said before, it really felt like I was wiretapping this one way of a conversation, and at the same time, as I briefly mentioned, certain things from family were a bit difficult, but what it did for me to read, because sometimes it wasn't always the most pleasant coming from people that were close, but it made it all much more human, that it was a human being that was living and breathing, that had made these things, that had made these pictures that I had found all this time ago that I thought were really kind of cool. Trying to think if there's anything like specific, and as I said at that time, that I was looking for answers for things, and all I was finding was just more questions, and that was perfect. And it got to a point that I was completely, cool with it.
Thank you. And I think you brought up that aspect of humor, both of you, in his work, which was, I think, really important and something to be explored further too, which is great. But just turning to, there's lots of questions from our listeners, and an early question that came up, which connects us sort of some of the things we're thinking about, but from Rosamund Kinsey Milner, who's writing that Kitaj has been my favorite male artist since the early 1980s for his draftsmanship, collage images, narrative, and history painting. And they write that in the 90s, I worked on his retrospective at Tate with youth groups, and was shocked that the critics slated it, and it had such devastating repercussions on his life and wife. I was devastated when he committed suicide. Do you believe that these events affected him for the rest of his life? So that is something we should address and think about.
Absolutely. They affected him in his life and his work. I don't think, his death, there was a lot going on medically as well at that time. He was an artist who very much liked control. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I think there was a great fear of what might happen, as well as being on multiple medications to manage his Parkinson's, which now we've learned over time that these medications can cause depression and hallucinations and all these other things. So that's a very complicated. I don't think that what happened at the Tate was the cause of his death by any means. But it certainly carried into his art. And I think his losing Sandra most definitely impacted his creative process and the imagery that he was visiting in that last decade, most definitely. Oh, Michael?
The only thing that I can really kind of add is that, during the time at UCLA and before going and after and everything, when I would tell people in London that I was doing this thing, and I was looking at this and that in LA, and just mention Kitaj, so many people that had been through, that were in London on the ground during that period of time, they would just automatically just hit me with their opinions. It wasn't even like, oh, what do you think? Everyone just, it almost kind of felt like so many people had these feelings and pros and cons about what had happened, about the exhibition and things, that it felt like people just, as I said, people just wanted to get it out. And trust me, I don't think that this talk has been awesome, but I think it's important to talk about these things now, because it was really a long time ago, and a lot of the people that were there, a lot of the people are leaving, for the next world. And so it's important to, there will never be an answer. I have my own thoughts on, and Tracy has her thoughts, and that's great. But yeah, I think it's just important to finally just, open the box, so to speak, and talk about things. if these things are valid, then talk about.
Thank you. Thanks. There's a question, a different kind of question around Kitaj's technique. If you could talk about that a little bit. In particular, well, the Katia Robin, who's posing questions, asking about his use, for instance, of dry paint with linen ground showing through. So
right. So those are the late paintings. He was working on small linen canvases that he bought from a wonderful woman here who would stretch them and prepare them for him, and they were just rabbit skin glue, and then he'd go on straight with the oil paint. And those should be, we're going to be having a show at Piano Nobile in the spring, and it will include quite a few of those late paintings. So yeah, that was Kitaj would be the first to say he was not a spontaneous person. But I think that those late paintings, there's a freshness and a spontaneity to them, because you can see exactly how much they are worked very clearly, and there's a lightness to them, especially the self-portraits, I think, which are particularly beautiful. So yeah, the canvas would be prepared, and then he would just go in and paint, and had many of them around the studio at once that he'd go from. He'd put one mark down and then move on to the next. And I was showing Michael earlier. I've got my little kit behind me. So this is one of his brushes. See how, absolutely how he used it. So the kind of this drawing, and then he would pick out all the oil from the paint. He would soak it up on old socks. So that was very much part of this process to get this dryness to the paint. So
well, thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful to have that at hand too. Wonderful, thank you. Perhaps a last question. I know we're drawing to the end, but I was so struck by his use of colour, and particularly in the some of the works you shared. And there's a question from our audience about how his use of colour seems to embody more than a formalist quality or concern. And would you say that he used colour to carry symbolic meaning?
Michael, do you want to weigh in first? I have,
sure.
I have things to say.
I think there's definitely the influence of even simple things like Technicolor, of films from the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. We shouldn't forget that film was really important to him, and I think even the kind of semblance and of someone coming from the Midwest and having traveled so much and had seen so much of the world, and also painting wise, I think he had taken in a great deal of the history of painting, and I think he was also going back around. There's the Francis Bacon painting, and I'm gonna get the title wrong, but the title, the chromatic chrome something or other. I haven't
Synchrony.
Yes, the whole concept of synchrony is the whole concept of color basically making form and making space. And to kind of quote that in your title is a bold move, but it also means that you're very aware of the potential nature of what color could actually do. And
he worked right from the tube. He didn't mix colors. And I loved going shopping for paint with him because he loved the names, and he would be, oh, we got to get this one because this has a really great name. So there were boxes and boxes of paint in the studio that he would pick out at the shop and then do right from this, put it onto the sock and then paint right from the tube, and any mixing would just happen on the canvas. So there was no mixing on a palette. In his Los Angeles days, there were palettes used in his earlier paintings. And I think too, he was very interested in Kabbalism in his late years, and this mysticism, Jewish mysticism, and reading a lot around that. And I believe there are a lot of color theories that tie into that and that kind of spirituality, especially in those, again, Los Angeles paintings, which kind of predate those raw linen works, where he was thinking a lot about this mysticism with the Shekinah and this idea of meeting Sandra again and her being ever present. So definitely symbolic.
Yeah.
Thank you. You've given us so much food for thought there. That's really, really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you to you both for this conversation, and we'll look forward to the exhibition next spring. Am I right? At Piano Nobile?
Spring, yes, you can. We have a website, rbkitaj.org, which will have information on it, and I'm available through that website as well. My contact information is there. So
wonderful.
If anybody has other questions, yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you both, and thanks to all our audience listening.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.